You know what they say about democracy, right? It's the worst form of government except for all the others. Well, whoever they are clearly never attended a Galactic Council meeting where 47 different alien species get to vote on whether your entire civilization should be enslaved. Spoiler alert, the motion passed 46-1, with only the Xanthari abstaining because they were too busy molting to care about politics. The whole thing started 3 months ago, when humanity finally got our invite to the big kids table. After decades of intercepting alien communications, reverse engineering crashed UFOs, thanks, Roswell, and generally making nuisances of ourselves by refusing to die out despite every cosmic disaster thrown our way, the Galactic Council decided we were sufficiently advanced to join their little club. Commander David Steele, yes, that's actually his name, and yes, his parents clearly had a sense of humor, or a crystal ball, stood in the observation deck of humanity's first diplomatic vessel, the UES Defiance, watching the council chambers through reinforced titanium glass. At 35, Steele had already survived 3 alien contact scenarios, 2 interdimensional incidents, and 1 very awkward first contact situation involving a species that communicated exclusively through interpretive dance. "Sir?" Lieutenant Vega approached, tablet in hand and expression carefully neutral. "We're receiving the final vote tallies now." "Let me guess," Steele said, not turning from the window. "It wasn't even close. 46 votes in favor of Resolution 77 Alpha. The mandatory integration and supervised development of species designation human. 1 abstention. Supervised development, Steele repeated slowly. That's a fancy way of saying slavery, isn't it? The diplomatic translation would be benevolent guidance with restricted autonomy. Vega replied. But yes, sir, it's slavery. Down in the council chambers, representatives from nearly 50 species were congratulating each other on a job well done. The Corthani delegation was doing that weird thing where they vibrated their thorax plates in what passed for applause. The Vex High were releasing pheromones that probably translated to, "Good job, everyone." And the Draknari ambassador, a 12-foot-tall lizard-bird hybrid with anger management issues, was giving what could generously be called a victory speech. "The humans," the Draknari was saying, his voice echoing through universal translators, "represent a clear and present danger to galactic stability. Their aggressive expansion, their tendency toward violence, their complete disregard for established protocols, their annoying habit of not dying when we want them to," Steele muttered, "makes supervised integration not just preferable, but necessary for the safety of all civilized species." The really infuriating part wasn't even the vote itself, it was the smugness. 46 species had just voted to enslave humanity, and they were acting like they'd done everyone a favor. Like they were the responsible adults cleaning up after unruly children. "Sir," Vega said quietly, "Admiral Harrison is requesting immediate communication." Steele finally turned from the window. "Put him through." The hologram of Admiral William Harrison materialized in the center of the observation deck, his weathered face grim. At 62, Harrison had commanded everything from submarine fleets to orbital defense platforms, but this was probably his strangest assignment yet. "Dave," Harrison said without preamble, "please tell me you have good news." "Define good," Steele replied. "If by good you mean we're about to become the galaxy's newest slave species, then yes, fantastic news all around." Harrison's expression didn't change. The vote? 46-0, with 1 abstention. The Xanthari couldn't be bothered to participate because apparently they're in the middle of some biological process that takes precedence over minor things like civilizational enslavement. And their reasoning? Steele gestured toward the council chambers. "The usual? We're too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous to be left unsupervised. The Draknari are still going on about our inherent violence and our refusal to follow proper diplomatic channels." "Proper diplomatic channels," Harrison repeated. "Didn't they open first contact by trying to harvest our organs?" "That was a cultural misunderstanding," Vega interjected. "They thought we were already dead." "Right, because nothing says we come in peace like showing up with surgical equipment." Harrison leaned forward slightly. "David, I need you to listen very carefully. Command has been monitoring this situation, and we've prepared for this contingency." Steele raised an eyebrow. "Contingency? Operation Rejection Notice," Harrison said. "It's time to show our new galactic neighbors exactly why 46 species voting to enslave us might have been a tactical error." Down in the council chambers, the Draknari ambassador was wrapping up his speech with what sounded suspiciously like gloating. "The integration process will begin immediately. Human military assets will be decommissioned, their aggressive leadership replaced with more suitable administrators from species with proper experience in galactic governance. More suitable administrators, Steele repeated. I'm starting to really dislike these people. The feeling appears to be mutual, sir, Vega observed. Harrison's hologram flickered slightly as the communication array adjusted to long-range transmission. David, you're about to receive a data package with very specific instructions. Follow them exactly, and whatever you do, do not let the Council see you receive this transmission. Admiral, what exactly are we? Just trust me, Commander. And remember, sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Especially when your opponents think they've already won. The transmission cut out, leaving Steele and Vega alone in the observation deck. A few seconds later, Steele's personal communicator chimed with an incoming data burst. Heavily encrypted, maximum security clearance required. Sir, Vega said, watching the Council chambers where the various species were beginning to file out. What do you think Command has in mind? Steele looked at the encrypted data package, then back at the smug alien representatives below. 46 species had just voted to enslave humanity because they thought we were too dangerous to be left alone. They were about to discover that they were absolutely right. Lieutenant, he said, I think we're about to give them a practical demonstration of exactly why you should never corner a species that survived ice ages, plagues, world wars, and reality television. Should I be concerned about the phrasing of that order, sir? Probably, Steele admitted. But at this point, I'm more concerned about what happens if we don't follow it. The thing about galactic civilizations, Steele reflected as he read through Admiral Harrison's data package, is that they really love their bureaucracy. The Galactic Council had forms for everything. Forms for declaring war, forms for establishing trade routes, forms for filing complaints about other species' forms. They had committees to organize committees, and subcommittees to ensure the committees were properly organized. What they apparently didn't have was a form for what to do when the species you just voted to enslave politely declines your generous offer. This is comprehensive, Vega said, looking over Steele's shoulder at the tactical readout, and slightly terrifying. The terrifying part is probably intentional, Steele replied, scrolling through deployment schedules, resource allocations, and what appeared to be a very detailed psychological profile of every species in the Galactic Council. Command's been planning for this scenario for longer than I thought. How long? According to this, since approximately 15 minutes after we intercepted our first alien transmission. Apparently someone in strategic planning has a very pessimistic view of galactic politics. The plan was elegantly simple in concept, horrifyingly complex in execution, and absolutely guaranteed to either save humanity or get them all killed in the most spectacular way possible. Knowing the human tendency toward dramatic overreaction, Steele figured the odds were about 50-50. Sir, Vega said, highlighting a particular section of the document. This part here about acceptable casualty rates seems optimistic. That's because it assumes the other side will be reasonable, Steele replied. Which, given that they just voted to enslave us, might be a questionable assumption. The door to the observation deck chimed, and Chief Petty Officer Riley entered with the kind of expression that suggested someone, somewhere, was about to have a very bad day. Riley was one of those people who looked like he'd been built specifically for military service. Compact, efficient, and perpetually ready to apply violence to problems until they stopped being problems. Commander, Riley said, we're receiving transmission requests from 17 different species. They want to discuss integration protocols and compliance procedures. Integration protocols, Steele repeated. Let me guess, that's bureaucrat speak for how quickly can you surrender your weapons and line up for processing. That would be my interpretation, sir. Steele closed the datapad and looked back at the council chambers, where a few stragglers were still congratulating each other on a vote well voted. The Draknari ambassador was deep in conversation with what appeared to be a cybernetic squid, the Nexian Collective's representative, probably discussing the finer points of human subjugation. Riley, Steele said, please inform our galactic neighbors that we're currently reviewing their generous offer and will respond shortly. How shortly, sir? Long enough for Operation Rejection Notice to deploy, Steele replied. And Riley, when you talk to them, make sure to sound appropriately defeated. We want them to think we're going along with this. Riley's grin was the sort that would have made pirates reconsider their career choices. I can manage that, sir. After Riley left, Vega pulled up the tactical display showing the positions of the various alien fleets scattered throughout the system. 47 species had brought representatives to the council meeting, and most had arrived with what they diplomatically termed escort vessels. Steele counted at least 300 ships of various designs and capabilities, all presumably ready to enforce the Council's decision if humanity proved unreasonable. They certainly came prepared, Vega observed. They did, Steele agreed. The question is whether they came prepared for the right thing. His personal communicator chimed again. Another encrypted burst from Earth. This one was shorter, just a few lines of text, but the content made him smile for the first time since the vote. Sir, Phase 1 is complete, Steele said. Admiral Harrison sends his compliments and wants us to know that the welcome wagon is loaded and ready to go. The welcome wagon? Something tells me that's not the technical designation, Steele replied, but it sounds appropriately cheerful for what's about to happen. Down in the council chambers, the last of the representatives were finally filing out, probably to return to their ships and begin planning the next phase of humanity's integration. The Draknari ambassador paused at one of the viewing windows, looking up at the human vessel with what could have been satisfaction or anticipation. It was hard to tell with species that had evolved from something that looked like a cross between a velociraptor and a tax auditor. Sir, the communications officer's voice crackled over the intercom. We're receiving another transmission request. This one's from the Draknari flagship. Put them through, Steele said. Let's see what our new overlords have to say. The hologram that materialized this time was the Draknari ambassador himself. Ambassador Krexnos, according to the diplomatic files. 12 feet tall, covered in scales that shifted from dark green to amber depending on his mood, with eyes that suggested his species had spent their evolutionary history as apex predators. Which, according to the intelligence briefings, was exactly what had happened. Commander Steele, Krexnos said, his voice carrying the sort of authority that came from being accustomed to having smaller species obey without question. I trust you witnessed the Council's decision. Hard to miss, Steele replied. 46-0 is pretty decisive. Indeed. The integration process will begin immediately. You will surrender command of your vessel to designated administrators, and your crew will be transferred to appropriate facilities for processing and retraining. Processing and retraining, Steele repeated. That sounds ominous. It is a standard procedure, Krexnos assured him. Your species shows potential, but requires proper guidance to reach its full capabilities. Under Council supervision, humanity will contribute meaningfully to galactic civilization. How generous of you. The alternative, Krexnos continued, would be considerably less pleasant. Several species advocated for more permanent solutions to the human problem. The Vex High suggested biological modification. The Nexian Collective recommended full digital integration. The compromise solution of supervised development was reached only after considerable debate. So we should be grateful you're only planning to enslave us instead of lobotomizing us or turning us into cyborgs. Precisely. Krexnos seemed pleased that Steele was finally understanding the situation. You have 1 standard hour to prepare your vessel for transfer of command. I suggest you use the time wisely. The transmission ended, leaving Steele and Vega alone with the tactical display and the growing realization that 46 alien species had just made what might prove to be a very serious miscalculation. Sir, Vega said quietly, the Draknari battle group is moving into position around our ship. Looks like they're not taking any chances. Steele checked his chronometer. According to Admiral Harrison's timetable, Phase 2 would begin in approximately 23 minutes. Phase 3 would follow 30 seconds later. After that, things were going to get very interesting very quickly. Lieutenant, he said, please inform the crew that we'll be conducting an unscheduled combat drill in approximately 20 minutes. Full battle stations, all hands. Combat drill, sir? While we're surrounded by 300 alien warships? Especially while we're surrounded by 300 alien warships, Steele confirmed. And Vega? Make sure everyone understands that this isn't actually a drill. The beautiful thing about being underestimated, Steele thought, as he watched the alien fleets position themselves around Earth's diplomatic vessel, is that it gives you such wonderful opportunities to exceed expectations. The Draknari, Vex High, Nexian Collective, and 43 other species had just spent 3 hours voting to enslave humanity based on the assumption that humans were dangerous but manageable. They were about to discover that they'd gotten the dangerous part right and the manageable part spectacularly wrong. Combat stations, all hands, the ship's intercom announced. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Through the observation deck's windows, Steele could see the alien ships adjusting their formations with the kind of casual confidence that suggested they'd done this sort of thing before. The Draknari battlecruisers formed a loose sphere around the human vessel, their weapon systems powered but not actively targeting. The Vex-High swarm ships clustered like metallic insects, while the Nexian collective's geometric monstrosities hung in space with the patience of machines that had all the time in the universe. 17 minutes until Phase 2, Vega reported, her voice steady despite the fact that they were currently outnumbered approximately 300 to 1. Any second thoughts about this plan, Lieutenant? Several dozen, sir, but I figure if we're going to be enslaved anyway, we might as well make it entertaining. The tactical display updated with new information as more alien ships moved into position. The Council had certainly brought enough firepower to deal with any reasonable resistance. Unfortunately for them, human beings had never been particularly reasonable, and the last 3 months of preparation had been focused on making sure their first impression of humanity's military capabilities would be both accurate and deeply unsettling. Sir, the communications officer announced, we're receiving multiple transmission requests. The Draknari want to know why we've gone to battle stations. The Vex-High are asking if we require technical assistance. And the Zenthari are... Actually, I'm not sure what the Zenthari are doing, but their translator is having some kind of breakdown. Tell them we're conducting routine maintenance, Steele replied. Nothing to worry about. Routine maintenance at battle stations, sir? Humans are very thorough about maintenance. It's one of our more endearing qualities. His personal communicator chimed with another encrypted burst from Earth. This one containing real-time tactical updates from Admiral Harrison's command center. What he saw made him whistle softly under his breath. Sir? Vega asked. Phase 1 deployment is complete, Steele said. Apparently the welcome wagon is even larger than I thought. How much larger? Let's just say that whoever designed this operation has a very generous definition of proportional response. The alien fleets continued their positioning, apparently satisfied that the single human vessel posed no significant threat. From their perspective, it made perfect sense. One small diplomatic ship against 300 warships from 46 different species. The mathematics were fairly straightforward. What they couldn't see, because humans had gotten very, very good at making sure people couldn't see things when they didn't want them seen, was the cloud of stealth platforms that had been quietly taking position around the system for the past 72 hours. Admiral Harrison's welcome wagon consisted of approximately 2,000 automated defense platforms, each one roughly the size of a shipping container and packed with enough firepower to ruin someone's entire day. But the platforms were just the opening act. 12 minutes to Phase 2, Vega announced. Excellent. Chief Riley, please inform our guests that we've finished our maintenance and are ready to discuss their generous integration offer. Aye, sir. Should I sound appropriately subdued and defeated? Absolutely. We want them nice and relaxed for what comes next. The next few minutes passed with the sort of tense calm that typically preceded either diplomatic breakthroughs or spectacular disasters. The alien representatives exchanged communications with their respective fleets, probably coordinating the handover procedures and discussing the finer points of human subjugation. Several more ships moved into position, including what appeared to be specialized boarding craft designed for capturing and processing unwilling crews. Sir, Vega said quietly, I'm detecting movement from the Draknari battle group. Looks like they're preparing to send boarding parties. Right on schedule, Steele replied. How thoughtful of them to get into optimal range. Optimal range for what, sir? You'll see. At exactly 1800 hours, ship time, Phase 2 commenced with a transmission from Admiral Harrison that reached every human vessel, platform, and installation in the solar system simultaneously. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison's voice echoed through the Defiance's bridge. Operation Rejection Notice is now active. All units, you are authorized to proceed with enthusiasm. What happened next would later be described by military historians as either the most brilliant tactical deception in human history, or the most expensive practical joke ever played on an unsuspecting galaxy. Possibly both. The first sign that something had gone wrong with the aliens' careful planning was when their sensor systems registered approximately 2,000 new contacts appearing throughout the system. The stealth platforms had dropped their cloaking fields simultaneously, creating a light show that was visible even to the naked eye as their power cores came online. Contact! The tactical officer announced unnecessarily, as every display on the bridge lit up with proximity alerts. Multiple contacts. Confirmed weapons platforms deploying throughout the system. The alien fleets immediately went to combat alert, but their positioning, perfectly arranged for surrounding a single helpless human vessel, was absolutely terrible for dealing with threats that suddenly appeared in all directions. The Draknari battle group found themselves boxed in by defense platforms that had emerged from the asteroid belt. The Vex-High swarm was scattered across 3 different orbital zones, with automated weapon systems appearing between their formations. The Nexian Collective's geometric ships discovered that their carefully calculated positions had become a tactical nightmare as stealth platforms activated within their own defensive perimeter. "Sir," Vega said, staring at the tactical display in something approaching awe, "the deployment pattern is comprehensive." "Admiral Harrison believes in being thorough," Steele replied, "but this is still just the opening ceremony." The communications board lit up with incoming transmissions from dozens of alien ships, all demanding explanations, tactical assessments, or immediate human surrender. The Draknari ambassador's hologram materialized again, and this time his amber scales had shifted to a distinctly alarmed shade of red. "Commander Steele!" Krexenos snarled. "What is the meaning of this? You were ordered to surrender your vessel." "Actually," Steele replied conversationally, "I don't recall agreeing to that. I said we were reviewing your generous offer. This is our response." "You cannot seriously intend to resist. You are outnumbered 300 to 1. 300 to 1, Steele agreed. "That's not very sporting, is it? Don't worry, we're working on evening those odds." As if summoned by his words, the second wave of Phase 2 materialized from the outer system. The human fleet, all of it, dropped out of hyperspace in a coordinated arrival that had been timed to the second. 150 ships, ranging from nimble destroyers to massive battle carriers, appeared in formation around Earth with their weapon systems already charged and targeting solutions already calculated. "Admiral Harrison sends his compliments," Steele announced to the increasingly frantic alien communications, "and wants you to know that humanity has decided to respectfully decline your integration offer." The tactical display was now a three-dimensional nightmare of overlapping fields of fire, with human platforms and ships positioned to catch the alien fleets in a devastating crossfire. Every alien vessel in the system was being targeted by at least 6 different weapon systems, and many were locked onto by considerably more. "This is impossible!" Krexenos was saying, his voice rising with what might have been panic. "Our intelligence indicated minimal human military capability." "Your intelligence," Steele replied cheerfully, "was absolutely correct. This is minimal human military capability. We didn't want to seem like we were showing off." "Sir," the communications officer announced, "we're receiving surrender requests from pretty much everyone. The Vexhi are asking for terms. The Nexian Collective wants to negotiate. And the Zenthari. The Zenthari are trying to surrender in 17 different languages simultaneously." "How flattering," Steele said. "Please inform them that we'll be happy to discuss terms just as soon as they explain why 46 civilized species thought enslaving us was a reasonable diplomatic solution." But Phase 2 wasn't finished yet. As the alien representatives frantically attempted to contact their respective governments, the final component of Admiral Harrison's welcome wagon made its appearance. The Luna defense grid came online with a hum that was audible even through the vacuum of space, its massive energy projectors focusing on the largest alien vessels with the sort of precision that suggested considerable practice. "Commander," Krexenos said, his earlier authority completely gone, "perhaps there has been some misunderstanding." "Oh, I don't think so," Steele interrupted. "The misunderstanding was thinking that a species which survived everything Earth could throw at us would be easy to manage. The misunderstanding was assuming that being outnumbered was automatically a disadvantage. The misunderstanding was forgetting that humans are really, really good at holding grudges. We can negotiate. Actually, Ambassador, we can negotiate. In fact, we'd be delighted to negotiate. But we'll be negotiating from a position of strength, not weakness. And the first item on the agenda will be explaining to the Galactic Council exactly why voting to enslave people without asking them first is considered extremely rude in human culture." The alien fleets hung in space, surrounded, outgunned, and facing the sudden realization that they had just made what might prove to be the most expensive mistake in galactic history. The species that had voted to enslave humanity were now trapped in the very system they'd come to conquer, at the mercy of the people they'd intended to subjugate. "Sir," Vega said quietly, "I think they're starting to understand the situation." "Good," Steele replied, "because we're just getting started. There's something deeply satisfying about watching 300 alien warships try to figure out how they went from conquering heroes to hostages in the span of about 15 minutes. Steele observed the controlled chaos through the Defiance's main view screen as alien captains frantically conferred with their fleet commanders, who were frantically conferring with their governments, who were presumably frantically wondering how their foolproof plan to enslave humanity had turned into a tactical disaster of galactic proportions. "Status report," Steele requested, settling into his command chair with the air of someone who was thoroughly enjoying the afternoon's entertainment. All alien vessels are maintaining position, Lieutenant Vega reported. No weapons charging, no attempt to break formation. The Nexian Collective tried to activate some kind of quantum displacement drive about 10 minutes ago, but the Lunagrid locked onto them before they could complete the sequence. How unfortunate for them. The Draknari battle group is requesting permission to, and I quote, discuss alternative diplomatic solutions in a spirit of mutual respect and understanding. How refreshingly civilized of them. What about the others? The Vexhai Collective is transmitting what their translators are calling apologetic pheromone patterns. The Zenthari have officially declared a state of emergency and are requesting asylum. And the Korthani delegation wants to know if there's some kind of form they can fill out to withdraw their vote. Steele couldn't help but smile. 46 species vote to enslave us, and now they want to fill out forms to take it back. There's something beautifully absurd about that. His personal communicator chimed with another transmission from Admiral Harrison. This time, instead of encrypted tactical data, it was a simple message. Phase 3 is authorized. Try not to have too much fun with this part. Phase 3, according to the operational parameters, was what military planners euphemistically called diplomatic clarification. In practical terms, it meant explaining to the assembled alien representatives exactly why their recent voting decision had been such a spectacularly bad idea. Chief Riley, Steele announced over the intercom. Please inform our guests that Commander David Steele of the United Earth Space Forces cordially invites the entire Galactic Council to attend an impromptu diplomatic conference aboard the UES Defiance. Transportation will be provided. All of them, sir? Riley's voice carried a note of what might have been concern. All of them. Tell them it's mandatory. And if they decline, sir, then they can explain their reasons to the Luna Defense Grid. I'm sure those massive energy projectors have nothing better to do than wait for people to change their minds. Within 30 minutes, the Defiance's main hangar bay had been converted into the universe's most awkwardly attended diplomatic conference. 46 alien ambassadors, representing species ranging from crystalline energy beings to what appeared to be evolved houseplants, clustered in small groups around the hangar while human security personnel looked on with expressions of professional politeness and barely concealed amusement. The Draknari ambassador, Krexnos, had lost most of his earlier authority and now looked like someone who was desperately trying to figure out where everything had gone wrong. The Vexhai representative, a writhing mass of tentacles and bioluminescent patches, was emitting what the translators helpfully identified as deep regret patterns. The Nexian Collective's cybernetic squid was running diagnostic routines on itself, apparently convinced that its recent experiences couldn't possibly be real. Distinguished representatives, Steele began, taking his position at the front of the hangar. Welcome aboard the UES Defiance. I trust your accommodations are acceptable? The silence that greeted this question was the kind typically associated with funeral services or tax audits. Excellent. Now then, I understand there was some confusion earlier regarding the nature of human-alien relations. Specifically, there seems to have been a misunderstanding about humanity's willingness to accept what you generously termed supervised development. Ambassador Krexnos stepped forward, his scales shifting to what might have been diplomatic beige. Commander Steele, I believe there may have been some miscommunication regarding the Council's intentions. Oh, I don't think so, Steele interrupted. The vote was quite clear. 46 species in favor of enslaving humanity, 0 opposed, 1 abstention. Those are remarkably unambiguous numbers. The term supervised development was intended to convey slavery with better marketing. Steele finished. Yes, we got that part. What I'm curious about is the reasoning behind this decision. After all, 46 civilized species don't just randomly decide to enslave someone without a compelling justification. The conversation continued as Steele systematically dismantled every argument the Council had used to justify their enslavement vote, pointing out the hypocrisy, the logical inconsistencies, and the fundamental violation of basic diplomatic principles. What made it particularly satisfying was watching the alien ambassadors realize, one by one, that their careful analysis of humanity had been based on prejudice, fear, and a fundamental misunderstanding of what made humans dangerous. The Council's analysis, Steele said eventually, was based on the assumption that we would be easy to control. You saw our defensive capabilities and concluded that we were dangerous but manageable. You were right about the dangerous part. Chief Riley appeared at Steele's shoulder with intelligence updates that made the situation even more interesting. The news of humanity's resistance was spreading across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds, and the reaction was not what the Galactic Council had anticipated. Admiral Harrison informs me that we're currently receiving diplomatic communications from approximately 200 other species, all of whom are very interested in humanity's perspective on recent events. Several major trade alliances are requesting emergency sessions to discuss the implications of the Council's actions. And the Galactic Ethics Board, I wasn't aware there was such a thing, has announced a formal investigation into potential violations of interspecies conduct protocols. The Andromedan Trade Federation has just announced a complete embargo on all member species of the Galactic Council, pending resolution of what they're calling the human question. The Spiral Arm Defense Alliance has declared the Council's actions a violation of interstellar law. And the Cetacean Collective, apparently there's a species of space whales who have strong opinions about slavery, has announced that they're formally recognizing humanity as a sovereign species with full territorial rights. The silence in the hangar bay was now approaching funeral-quality levels of awkwardness. So, Steele continued cheerfully, it appears that your little voting session has created exactly the kind of galactic instability you were supposedly trying to prevent. Congratulations on a job well done. Congratulations on her. Commander, Crexenos said, his voice carrying what might have been desperation. Surely we can resolve this misunderstanding through negotiation. Oh, I completely agree, Steele replied. Negotiation is an excellent idea. In fact, I have some preliminary terms we can discuss. He presented terms that were remarkably reasonable. Formal rescission of the enslavement resolution, acknowledgement of human sovereignty, establishment of consensual first contact protocols, and creation of oversight mechanisms to prevent similar incidents in the future. Nothing punitive, nothing that would humiliate the council members. Just basic recognition that enslaving people without their consent wasn't acceptable diplomatic behavior. But even as the negotiations proceeded, Admiral Harrison was communicating updates that suggested the situation was evolving beyond anyone's expectations. The broader galactic community wasn't just condemning the Council's actions. They were questioning the entire system of galactic governance that had allowed those actions to occur in the first place. And then the diplomatic flotilla arrived. Sir, Lieutenant Vega reported, we're receiving priority transmissions from the outer system. Multiple contacts dropping out of hyperspace. Actually, a lot of contacts. How many is a lot? Steele asked. Approximately 800 ships representing 73 different species, all requesting immediate diplomatic audience with human representatives. The lead ship transmitted a message from Coordinator Luminescence of the Ancient Assembly, a being composed of living starlight who spoke for civilizations that predated recorded galactic history. Their message was simple. Humanity's resistance to unjust authority had inspired voluntary cooperation among species that hadn't communicated in millennia. They were proposing a new form of galactic governance based on voluntary participation, consensual membership, and mutual respect. A confederation of equals, Coordinator Luminescence explained, where membership is voluntary, decisions require genuine consensus, and no species may be subjected to integration without their explicit consent. It was the kind of revolutionary idea that only sounds radical until you realize it's basically common sense applied to interstellar relations. Ambassador Crexenos looked at the formal document, then at his fellow ambassadors, then at the tactical display showing 800 ships full of species that were apparently done with the current system of galactic governance. Where do we sign? He asked. 6 months later, Commander David Steele stood on the observation deck of the newly constructed Diplomatic Coordination Station, watching the controlled chaos of interspecies cooperation taking place in the space around Earth. The Sol system had become the unofficial capital of what everyone was calling the Cooperative Confederation of Free Species. The transformation had been comprehensive. Luna now hosted the largest diplomatic facility in galactic history, with embassy complexes for over 200 species. Mars had been converted into a massive cultural exchange center. Earth itself remained primarily human, but with carefully managed zones for alien visitors who wanted to experience what Coordinator Luminescence called the planet that said no to slavery. Sir, Lieutenant Vega approached with her daily briefing tablet. The morning reports. Any interesting developments? The former Galactic Council species have completed their integration into the Confederation. The Draknari have established a military cooperation program with the Andromedan Defense Fleet. The Vexhai are teaching their bioluminescent communication methods to anyone interested. And the Zenthari have become the Confederation's primary diplomatic protocol specialists. What about the holdouts? Still 17 species maintaining the old council structure, but they're having increasing problems with their member populations demanding reforms. Intelligence suggests it's only a matter of time before they either join the Confederation or collapse entirely. Steele nodded, watching a Cetacean Collective vessel performing celebratory barrel rolls around a crystalline ancient assembly ship. 6 months ago, these species had barely acknowledged each other's existence. Now they were collaborating on everything from scientific research to artistic projects. The statistics were impressive. 312 species in active cooperation, 0 military conflicts between member civilizations, and a 347% increase in interspecies trade, cultural exchange, and scientific collaboration. Not bad for 6 months' work. Any word from Admiral Harrison about the expansion protocols? The Outer Rim species have requested formal contact. Apparently, word about the Confederation has reached the galactic edge, and several previously isolationist civilizations want to discuss membership. How many is several? Approximately 300 species, sir. Steele whistled softly. 300. At this rate, we're going to need to start construction on additional diplomatic facilities. Admiral Harrison anticipated that possibility. He's requested authorization to begin development of the Jupiter diplomatic complex. Jupiter? The entire planet? Just the orbital zone, sir. Apparently the Admiral believes in planning for growth. A communication chime indicated an incoming priority transmission. The hologram that materialized was Coordinator Luminescence, whose starlight form had become a familiar sight around the Sol system. Commander Steele, the entity said, the Confederation Council has reached consensus on the Humanity Appreciation Resolution. I'm almost afraid to ask what that involves. A formal declaration recognizing humanity's unique contribution to galactic civilization. Namely, proving that newcomers do not have to accept subjugation simply because established powers demand it. That's actually quite an honor. The resolution also designates the Sol system as the permanent site of the Confederation Council, with Earth serving as the symbolic center of cooperative galactic governance. Steele looked out at the bustling space lanes filled with ships from hundreds of different species, all of them engaged in the kind of peaceful cooperation that nobody had thought possible 6 months earlier. Coordinator, he said, I think humanity can live with that arrangement. Excellent. There is one additional matter. The Ancient Assembly has discovered references to several other regions of space where similar Confederation models have been attempted. They are interested in establishing contact with these civilizations to share experiences and potentially coordinate larger-scale cooperation. How much larger scale? Intergalactic, Commander. It appears that the principle of consensual governance has applications beyond our current scope of operations. Steele felt a familiar sensation that he was beginning to recognize as the universe's way of telling him that his life was about to become considerably more complicated. Intergalactic cooperation, he said slowly. Because apparently managing relationships with 300 species in our own galaxy wasn't ambitious enough. The Ancient Assembly believes that humanity's approach to resistance and diplomacy represents a significant evolutionary development in interspecies relations. They are interested in sharing this model with civilizations that may be facing similar challenges in other regions of space. Coordinator, are you suggesting that there are other galaxies where established powers are subjugating newcomers? It appears to be a relatively common pattern, Coordinator Luminescence replied. Power structures tend to resist change, regardless of their location in the universe. Lieutenant Vega looked up from her data tablet with an expression that suggested she was beginning to understand the broader implications of the conversation. Sir, she said quietly, if this becomes a standard diplomatic model, we're going to need considerably more than Jupiter for additional facilities. One crisis at a time, Lieutenant, Steele replied. Right now, I'm more concerned about making sure our current confederation actually works before we start exporting the concept to other galaxies. A wise approach, Coordinator Luminescence agreed. The Ancient Assembly is prepared to wait for the Sol Confederation to achieve full stability before pursuing broader initiatives. How long do you estimate that will take? Based on historical precedents for voluntary governmental transitions, we anticipate approximately 50 to 70 standard years for complete integration of all interested species. 50 to 70 years, Steele repeated. I'm not sure I'm going to be around to see the completion of that process. Commander, the Starlight entity said, and its form seemed to shift into what might have been an amusement. The Ancient Assembly has considerable experience with extending the operational lifespans of individuals whose expertise proves valuable to ongoing projects. Are you offering to make me immortal so I can manage interstellar politics for the next century? We prefer the term extended service capability, but yes, essentially. Steele looked out at the diplomatic stations, cultural exchange facilities, and defense platforms that now filled the Sol system. 6 months ago, he'd been commanding a single ship on humanity's first diplomatic mission. Now he was apparently being offered the chance to oversee the development of galactic civilization for the next several decades. I'll need to think about that offer, he said finally. Of course, There is no immediate urgency. The intergalactic contact initiatives will not begin for several centuries, regardless of your decision. The transmission ended, leaving Steele and Vega alone on the observation deck, with a view of what had become the most politically significant star system in the galaxy. "Sir," Vega said after a moment, "do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd just accepted the Council's integration offer?" "You mean if we'd agreed to become a client species under Draknari supervision?" "Yes, sir." Steele considered the question, watching a group of Vex-High bioships performing synchronized maneuvers with a squadron of human fighters in what appeared to be a joint training exercise. "I think," he said finally, "that the galaxy would have continued operating the same way it had for the past 1,000 years. Established species dominating newcomers, power structures maintaining themselves through intimidation, and nobody questioning whether there might be a better way to organize interstellar civilization. And now? Now we have 300 species working together voluntarily, sharing technology and culture freely, and demonstrating that cooperation works better than domination." He paused. "Plus, we've accidentally started what might become the largest political revolution in universal history. Do you think it will work? Long term, I mean." "I think," Steele said, "that any system based on voluntary participation and mutual respect has a better chance of succeeding than one based on imposed authority and threatened violence. Even with 300 different species with completely different cultures, biologies, and political systems? Especially with 300 different species. Diversity makes the system stronger, not weaker. When everyone has a voice, everyone has a stake in making sure the system works." Chief Riley's voice crackled over the intercom. "Commander, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. President Williams wants to discuss your extended service authorization." "Tell her I'm still reviewing the terms," Steele replied. "And Riley, ask her to have the State Department start recruiting more diplomatic personnel. Something tells me we're going to need them." "How many more, sir?" Steele looked at the tactical display showing the locations of species that had expressed interest in joining the Confederation, the regions of space where contact missions were being planned, and the preliminary data about intergalactic cooperation initiatives. "All of them," he said. "We're going to need all of them." As he watched, another group of ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, representatives from 5 more species that had requested membership in the Confederation. The Sol System's traffic control system smoothly integrated them into the arrival patterns, assigned them temporary diplomatic quarters, and began the process of cultural orientation that had become standard procedure for new members. 6 months ago, 46 alien species had voted to enslave humanity because they thought we were too dangerous to be left unsupervised. They'd been right about the dangerous part. We were dangerous to their entire system of galactic governance. We'd just been dangerous in a way they hadn't expected. Instead of using violence to resist domination, we'd used competence, preparation, and the novel concept of treating other species as equals worthy of respect. Instead of destroying the existing system, we'd offered them something better. Instead of becoming the threat they'd feared, we'd become the solution they hadn't realized they needed. "Sir," Lieutenant Vega said, "incoming transmission from the Draknari Embassy. Ambassador Krexnos wants to discuss the joint military training protocols." "The same Ambassador Krexnos who tried to convince us that slavery was for our own good?" "The same one, sir. He's apparently become quite enthusiastic about voluntary cooperation." "How the mighty have fallen," Steele observed. "Put him through!" The hologram that materialized showed the familiar figure of the Draknari ambassador, but his scales had shifted to colors that suggested contentment rather than authority. His posture was more relaxed, and his voice carried tones of genuine respect rather than condescension. "Commander Steele," Krexnos said, "the joint training exercises have exceeded all expectations. Our pilots report that human tactical innovations have improved their combat effectiveness by 37%. And what do our pilots report? That Draknari defensive formations provide excellent protection for human strike craft during complex maneuvers. Mutually beneficial cooperation," Steele said. "What a remarkable concept, indeed. Commander, I wanted to personally thank you for showing us that there was a better way. My species has learned much about the value of partnership rather than domination. Ambassador, 6 months ago you tried to enslave us. Now you're thanking us for resisting. That's quite a philosophical evolution. 6 months ago, I believed that strength meant the ability to impose your will on others. I have learned that true strength comes from inspiring others to work with you willingly. That's a lesson it took humanity several centuries to figure out ourselves," Steele admitted. "We're just fortunate that we learned it before we encountered galactic civilization. The galaxy is fortunate that you learned it. Krexnos corrected. Without humanity's example, many of us might have continued believing that domination was the only path to security. After the transmission ended, Steele remained on the observation deck, watching the constant flow of ships, diplomatic couriers, and cultural exchange vessels that had become the new normal for the Sol system. Lieutenant Vega joined him at the viewing port. "Sir, do you think we did the right thing? Refusing the integration offer, I mean?" "Lieutenant," Steele replied, 6 months ago, 46 species thought slavery was an acceptable solution to the problem of managing interspecies relations. Today, over 300 species are working together voluntarily to build a better system of galactic governance. I think we did exactly the right thing, even if it means we're now responsible for managing the political evolution of multiple galaxies. Especially if it means that, Steele said. Someone has to prove that cooperation works better than conquest. It might as well be us. He looked out at the stars, where somewhere beyond the edge of human perception, other civilizations were probably facing the same choice humanity had faced 6 months ago. Submit to established authority, or find the courage to demand something better. Besides, he added, it's not like we're doing this alone. We've got 300 species helping us figure it out, and apparently several ancient civilizations offering technical assistance. What could go wrong? Lieutenant Vega looked at him with an expression that suggested she was beginning to understand that this question was probably not rhetorical. "Sir," she said, "should I be concerned that you just asked what could go wrong?" "Probably," Steele admitted. "But at this point, I figure if we can handle aliens trying to vote us into servitude, we can probably handle whatever the universe decides to throw at us next." "Even intergalactic politics?" "Even intergalactic politics," he confirmed. After all, the basic principle remains the same. Treat people with respect, be prepared to defend yourself if necessary, and never underestimate the power of a good example. As if summoned by his words, another wave of ships appeared at the edge of the system. The advanced scouts of 12 more species requesting membership in the Confederation. The Sol system's automated greeting protocols activated, welcoming them to what had become the galaxy's most successful experiment in voluntary cooperation. "You know what the really satisfying part is?" Steele asked. "What's that, sir?" 46 species voted to enslave us because they thought we were too dangerous to manage ourselves, he said. They were absolutely right. We were too dangerous for their system to manage. We were too dangerous to accept subjugation, too dangerous to submit to unjust authority, and too dangerous to let existing power structures continue operating unopposed. And now they're all part of a system that proves that dangerous species can also be cooperative species, if you give them the chance to participate as equals rather than subjects. Lieutenant Vega smiled. "I think I'm beginning to understand why the Ancient Assembly wants to export this model to other galaxies." "That," Steele said, "is probably why they offered to make me immortal. Someone has to be around to explain to the next group of established powers that enslaving newcomers is a really, really bad idea. Are you going to accept their offer?" Steele looked out at the bustling space lanes, the diplomatic facilities, and the defense platforms that now protected not just humanity but the entire Confederation. 6 months ago, he'd been a ship commander dealing with a diplomatic crisis. Now he was apparently being offered the chance to help reshape the political structure of the universe. "Ask me again in 50 years, he said. "If we've managed to make this whole voluntary cooperation thing work on a galactic scale, I might be interested in trying it with a few more galaxies. And if we haven't? Then I'll probably be too busy dealing with the consequences to worry about intergalactic politics," he replied. "But somehow, I don't think that's going to be a problem." As if to prove his point, the daily statistical report appeared on his personal display. 312 species in active cooperation, 0 military conflicts between member civilizations, and a 347% increase in interspecies trade, cultural exchange, and scientific collaboration. Not bad for 6 months' work, he thought. Not bad at all. And in the distance, barely visible against the starfield, the first construction platforms were already beginning work on the Jupiter diplomatic complex, just in case they needed room for a few more friends. After all, the universe was a big place, and humanity had apparently developed a reputation for throwing very good parties, especially for species that had recently discovered the benefits of voluntary cooperation over imposed authority. The galaxy, it seemed, was finally learning how to get along, and it had only taken the threat of enslaving the wrong species to make it happen. Steele smiled. Sometimes, he reflected, the best way to solve a problem was to become the kind of problem that forced everyone else to find a better solution. The end. Look, I'm not saying the Galactic Council's emergency broadcast system is outdated, but when your most urgent alert sounds like a dying space whale having an existential crisis, maybe it's time for an upgrade. The warning klaxon that echoed through the inevitable victory. And yes, that's actually what the Zephyrian flagship was called, because apparently irony doesn't translate well across species, was enough to make every crew member's equivalent of blood run cold. Warning, a human war vessel has entered the war zone. All ships maintain maximum distance. Repeat, human vessel detected. Captain Zixthara of the Zephyrian 3rd Battle Fleet had been having what could generously be called a decent war until that moment. Sure, their conflict with the hegemony had been dragging on for 3 standard cycles, and yes, the casualty reports were getting harder to file in triplicate, but at least it was a civilized war. Both sides followed the Geneva Conventions, or rather, the Centauri Conventions, since Geneva was on some backwater planet nobody had heard of until recently. They had proper battle formations, scheduled ceasefires for maintenance, and even exchanged prisoners with reasonable regularity. It was warfare as it should be, organized, predictable, and conducted by beings who understood that there were rules to these things. Then the humans had to go and ruin everything. Sir, chittered Communications Officer Clicktor, his 6 eyes blinking in sequence like a biological error message. The human vessel is broadcasting on all frequencies. What are they saying? Zixthara asked. Though part of him, the part that had read the classified reports from the Outer Rim, already suspected he didn't want to know. They're playing music, sir. Music? Something called Fortunate Son by Creative Control Revival? Zixthara felt his combat tentacles twitch involuntarily. That was never a good sign. And what else? They're asking if anyone wants to get this party started, sir. Also, they've painted something on their hull. What kind of something? Clicktor's translator crackled with static as it tried to process the concept. It appears to be a representation of a human female in minimal clothing sitting on what our xenobiologists believe is an explosive device, sir. Beneath it are the words, "Kiss this," followed by several symbols our linguistic computers refuse to translate. This was exactly what Zixthara had been afraid of. The thing about humans, and this was covered extensively in the classified briefings that had been circulating through military channels since first contact, was that they approached warfare the same way they approached everything else, with absolutely no regard for how things were supposed to be done. While the rest of the galaxy had spent millennia developing sophisticated rules of engagement, proper battle formations, and civilized methods of mass destruction, humans had been perfecting the art of tactical insanity. They were the species that had looked at perfectly good military doctrine and said, "You know what this needs? More explosions and fewer safety protocols." "Sir," reported Tactical Officer Vrixneth, "I'm reading the human vessel's specifications. And, according to their broadcasts, it's called the UES Absolutely No Chill." Zixthara's primary brain processed this information while his secondary brain quietly filed a resignation letter. "What class of vessel?" "Unknown, sir. It doesn't match any configuration in our databases. Our sensors indicate well, it appears to have been assembled from components of at least 12 different ship classes, 3 civilian mining platforms, and what looks like an amusement park ride." "An amusement park ride?" "The gravitational accelerator appears to have been repurposed from something called a roller coaster, sir. There are also carnival lights." Through the main view screen, Zixthara could see the human ship approaching their battle formation. It was, well, calling it a ship was being generous. It looked like someone had taken a perfectly reasonable spacecraft, and then asked a committee of hyperactive children to improve it with unlimited access to a military surplus store. The hull was a patchwork of armor plating that seemed to have been welded on with more enthusiasm than skill. Weapon emplacements sprouted from every available surface like some kind of mechanical fungus. And yes, there were definitely carnival lights blinking along the superstructure in patterns that seemed designed to cause seizures in any species with photosensitive neural networks. "Sir," Clicktor reported, "they're hailing us." On screen. The face that appeared on the main viewer was unmistakably human, though Zixthara was still learning to read their expressions. This one seemed to be displaying what the cultural briefings had described as a shit-eating grin, though he had never understood why humans used that particular phrase. "Hey there, space buddies," the human said with the kind of enthusiasm typically reserved for greeting old friends at reunions. "I'm Commander Rick Morrison of the Absolutely No Chill, and we heard you folks were having yourselves a little war out here." Commander Morrison appeared to be a male of the species, though his appearance suggested he had accessorized his military uniform with items from what humans called a thrift store. He wore what looked like a regulation military jacket covered in patches, none of which matched any known human military insignia. His hair defied several laws of physics, and he was consuming what appeared to be a carbonated beverage directly from a metallic container. "This is Captain Zixthara of the Zephyrian 3rd Battle Fleet," Zixthara replied, trying to project authority despite the growing certainty that authority was about to become completely irrelevant. "We are engaged in a legitimate military conflict with the hegemony forces. Your presence here violates 17 different interstellar treaties." "Oh, those," Morrison waved dismissively, nearly spilling his beverage. "Yeah, we never actually signed those. Something about the fine print being in a language our translators kept rendering as bureaucratic nonsense. Besides, we're not here to interfere with your war." "You're not?" "Nah, we're here to improve it." Behind Morrison, Zixthara could see what appeared to be the human ship's bridge, though it looked more like the control room of a particularly chaotic entertainment complex. Crew members, and the term was being used loosely, moved around with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested they were either extremely well-trained or completely insane. Possibly both. One human appeared to be juggling what looked like plasma grenades, while another was playing what sounded like a musical instrument constructed from salvaged engine parts. In the background, someone was working on what appeared to be a weapons console that had been decorated with fuzzy dice and bumper stickers. "Improve it how?" Zixthara asked, though his survival instincts were already screaming at him to retreat to a safe distance. "Preferably in another star system." "Well, for starters, your formation is all wrong." Morrison gestured with his beverage can toward the Zephyrian battle line. "You've got a classic double-wing engagement pattern, which is great if you're fighting by the book, but where's the creativity?" "Where's the flair?" "Flair? You know, the pizzazz. The razzle-dazzle." "The holy crap. Did they just do what I think they did?" Morrison took a swig of his drink. "Your weapons loadout is pretty standard, too. Particle beams, photon torpedoes, some kind of gravitic pulse cannon. All very sensible, very boring." "Boring?" "Look, no offense, but you guys are fighting a war like it's a chess match. All careful moves and strategic positioning. That's great if you want to write textbooks about military theory, but if you want to actually win..." Morrison shrugged. "Well, that's where we come in." Zixthara was beginning to understand why the human files were classified. "We didn't request human assistance. Nobody ever does, but that's the thing about help. It's most effective when it's unexpected." Morrison grinned wider. "Besides, we were in the neighborhood and heard you guys were having trouble with the hegemony. We are conducting a strategic engagement according to established military protocols." "Right, and how's that working out for you?" Zixthara glanced at his tactical display. The truth was, it wasn't working out particularly well. The current engagement had been ongoing for 6 local days with minimal progress from either side. Both fleets were essentially locked in a stalemate, trading ineffective long-range fire while maneuvering for advantages that never quite materialized. "Our progress is methodical," he said finally. "Uh-huh," Morrison nodded. "And by methodical, you mean you're basically playing the galaxy's longest game of chicken while occasionally shooting at each other from really far away. That is a gross oversimplification of, hey, no judgment here. Everyone's got their style. Some people like to do things by the book, follow proper procedures, make sure all the paperwork is filled out in triplicate before they blow stuff up. We humans, though, we're more of a shoot first, ask questions while shooting, then blow something up and see what happens kind of species." As if summoned by Morrison's words, the hegemony fleet chose that moment to launch another wave of long-range missiles toward the Zephyrian formation. Standard procedure would be to deploy countermeasures, adjust formation to minimize damage, and prepare a measured response. The absolutely no-chill had other ideas. "Ooh, incoming party favors!" Morrison spun around in his command chair, which appeared to have been liberated from an amusement park bumper car. "Jenkins, fire up the disco ball!" "Sir, yes, sir!" came a voice from somewhere off-screen. What happened next would later be described in official reports as tactically impossible, physically improbable, and why we need stronger alcohol in the officers' mess. The human ship suddenly lit up like a small star, but instead of the usual harsh white light of military illumination, it was strobing through every color in the visible spectrum, and several that probably shouldn't exist. Music, the same upbeat melody they'd been broadcasting, kicked in at a volume that registered on sensors 3 systems away. Then the absolutely no-chill began to dance. There was no other word for it. The ship moved through space with a kind of rhythmic precision that suggested its pilot was either having a seizure or performing some kind of interpretive ballet. It spun, rolled, and corkscrewed through the missile barrage with movements that violated several fundamental principles of physics and at least one law of good taste. "What are they doing?" gasped Tactical Officer Vrixneth. "I believe," Zixthara said slowly, "they are engaging in what humans call showing off." The missiles designed to track and destroy targets moving in predictable military patterns seemed utterly confounded by a ship that was apparently trying to choreograph its own destruction. They streaked past the gyrating human vessel, chasing targeting locks that shifted faster than their guidance systems could compensate for. "This is impossible," Vrixneth muttered. "Those maneuvers should have torn their ship apart." "Yeah, about that." Morrison's voice came through the comm system with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "We may have made a few modifications to our inertial dampeners, and by modifications, I mean we turned them off and replaced them with what our engineer calls aggressive optimism." "You turned off your inertial dampeners?" Zixthara couldn't keep the horror out of his voice. "Just the boring ones. We kept the fun ones." While this conversation was happening, the absolutely no chill had somehow maneuvered itself behind the incoming missile wave. What happened next defied every principle of space combat Zixthara had ever learned. The human ship opened fire, but instead of the measured, targeted strikes of civilized warfare, it unleashed what could only be described as a festival of destruction. Weapons that had never been meant to work together fired in sequence, creating a light show that was equal parts devastating and fabulous. Particle beams painted rainbow patterns across space, while kinetic projectiles spelled out what the translator insisted was a very rude message in the ancient human language of graffiti. The hegemony missiles, caught in this maelstrom of tactical chaos, didn't so much explode as they did party. Each detonation triggered a cascade of secondary fireworks that lit up space like the finale of some cosmic celebration. "Did they just—" Clicktor's voice trailed off as he struggled to process what he'd witnessed. "Turn an incoming missile barrage into a fireworks display?" "Yes, I believe they did." Zixthara watched as the human ship executed what could only be called a victory dance through the fading explosions, and somehow made it look intentional. On screen, Morrison took another casual sip of his beverage. "Not bad for a warm-up. So, what do you say we show these hegemony folks how to really throw a party?" Before Zixthara could respond, and he wasn't entirely sure what his response would have been, the hegemony fleet decided to escalate. Their flagship, a massive dreadnought called the Inexorable Justice, began broadcasting on all frequencies. "Unknown vessel," came the stern voice of what was presumably the hegemony commander. "You have interfered with a legitimate military engagement. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences." Morrison's grin somehow managed to get even wider. "Oh, this is gonna be good. Patch me through to the big scary ship, would you?" The main screen split to show both Morrison and the hegemony commander, an imposing figure of the Crathari species, with the kind of multiple-armed, heavily armored appearance that suggested evolution had optimized them specifically for looking intimidating in military uniforms. "I am War Marshal Thekmon of the Hegemony 4th Assault Fleet," the Crathari announced. "You will withdraw from this combat zone immediately." "Hi there, War Marshal." Morrison waved cheerfully. "Love the whole intimidating warlord thing you've got going on. Very dramatic. I'm Commander Rick Morrison, and we're here to help. We require no assistance from primitives." "Primitives?" Morrison looked genuinely hurt. "That's not very nice. Just because we're the new kids on the block doesn't mean we can't contribute something to the conversation." "Your vessel is an insult to military engineering," Thekmon declared. "It appears to have been assembled by intoxicated children." "Hey now, that's completely unfair." Morrison's expression became serious. "Our children were completely sober when they helped with the weapons modifications. We take safety very seriously." Behind him, something exploded in a shower of sparks and carnival confetti. A crew member casually put out a small fire with what appeared to be a decorative water gun, while humming along to the music. "As you can see," Morrison continued, "we maintain the highest standards of professional conduct." Thekmon's multiple eyes narrowed. "You mock the sacred traditions of warfare." "Sacred traditions? Like what? Standing really far apart and shooting at each other until someone gets bored and goes home?" Morrison shook his head. "That's not warfare. That's the galaxy's most expensive game of tag. You know nothing of honor in combat." "Honor?" Morrison's voice took on a slightly different tone, still casual, but with an edge that hadn't been there before. "Let me tell you something about honor, War Marshal. We humans have a saying. It's not about the size of the ship in the fight, it's about the size of the fight in the ship. Your aphorisms mean nothing." "Maybe not, but here's another one. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes." Morrison set down his beverage and leaned forward. "You want to know what we humans consider honorable? Protecting people who can't protect themselves. Standing up to bullies. And making sure that when someone starts a fight, we're the ones who finish it. The casual, almost goofy demeanor had completely vanished. For the first time since the conversation began, Zixthara could see why humans had earned their reputation as a species to be taken seriously. The Zephyrians didn't start this war, Morrison continued. They're defending their colonies from your sacred traditions of conquest and subjugation. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to turn your ships around and head back to wherever it is you came from. And if you don't, you will what? Your single ship against my entire fleet. Morrison's grin returned, but it was different now. Less friendly, more predatory. War Marshal, have you ever heard of the human concept of escalation? I am not familiar with the term. It's when someone does something, and then someone else does something bigger, and then the first person has to do something even bigger than that, and it keeps going until... Morrison gestured vaguely at the view screen. Well, until things get interesting. As if on cue, space around the human ship began to shimmer. At first, Zixthara thought it might be some kind of sensor malfunction, but then the shimmer resolved into something that made his combat tentacles tie themselves into knots. Ships. Lots of ships. They appeared to be decloaking from some kind of stealth system that had rendered them completely invisible to even the most sophisticated sensors. But these weren't standard military vessels. They were human ships, each one as unique and apparently insane as the absolutely no chill. There was a ship that looked like it had been built around a massive speaker system, broadcasting what sounded like a human war chant at volumes that registered as a minor seismic event. Another vessel appeared to be constructed entirely from salvaged parts, and held together by what looked like aggressive welding and positive thinking. One ship, and Zixthara had to look twice to make sure he was seeing this correctly, appeared to be a converted civilian transport that someone had covered in armor plating and decorated with images of what the cultural database identified as cartoon characters. "Meet the rest of the gang," Morrison said cheerfully. "We call ourselves the Misfit Fleet. That's the Sweet Caroline. She's our mobile rave platform. The Hold My Beer is our engineering support ship, and the Saturday Morning Cartoons is... well, let's just say their captain has some very specific ideas about psychological warfare." More ships continued to decloak, each one more improbable than the last. There was a vessel that appeared to have been constructed around a massive cooking facility, another that looked like someone had armed a sports stadium, and one that might have been a converted shopping mall with engines bolted to the outside. "How many ships do you have?" War Marshal Thekmon demanded, and Zixthara could detect the first notes of uncertainty in his voice. "Well, that's an interesting question," Morrison said thoughtfully. "See, humans don't really do traditional military organization. We're more of a anyone who wants to help can help kind of species. So technically, we don't have a set number of ships." "What do you mean?" "I mean that every human civilian ship is basically a potential military vessel, if you push the right buttons and ask nicely. And there are a lot of human ships out there." Morrison's grin turned absolutely feral. "Plus, we may have sent word to a few of our friends that there was a party happening out here." As he spoke, more ships continued to appear. Some were clearly military vessels, but others were obviously civilian craft that had been hastily armed and armored by crews who seemed to consider safety regulations more of a suggestion than a requirement. "This is impossible," Thekmon said. "Our intelligence reports indicated that humanity possesses fewer than 200 military vessels." "Well, there's your problem right there," Morrison said. "You were looking for military vessels. We're not particularly big on the whole separation between civilian and military concept. When trouble starts, everyone pitches in." A new voice crackled over the comm system. "Hey, Rick, sorry we're late. Had to stop for snacks and ammunition." "No worries, Captain Williams. How many did you bring?" "Oh, about 350 ships. Maybe 400. I lost count after we picked up that convoy of deep space truckers who wanted to help." Zixthara checked his sensors. The human fleet now numbered in the hundreds, and more ships were arriving every few minutes. They came in every conceivable configuration, some sleek and military, others obviously civilian vessels that had been hastily converted for combat, and a few that defied any attempt at classification. "This is madness," War Marshal Thekmon said. "You cannot possibly coordinate a fleet of this size without proper military command structure." "Who says we're coordinating?" Morrison laughed. "Half these people don't even know each other. They just heard there was trouble and decided to drop by and help out. But how do you plan your attacks? How do you maintain formation discipline? How do you ensure tactical cohesion?" Morrison looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "We don't. That's kind of the point. See, the thing about humans is that we're really, really good at improvisation. You can plan for conventional tactics, But how do you plan for a species that makes up the rules as they go along? To demonstrate his point, the human fleet began to move. And if the absolutely no-chill's earlier maneuvers had been tactically impossible, what happened next was tactically incomprehensible. The ships moved in patterns that seemed to follow no recognizable military doctrine. Some vessels charged straight at the hegemony lines while others hung back and provided covering fire. A group of what appeared to be converted cargo haulers began performing synchronized barrel rolls while launching missiles in seemingly random directions. The Sweet Caroline positioned itself at the center of the formation and began playing what could only be described as the galaxy's most aggressive dance remix. Other ships began timing their attacks to the beat, creating a kind of musical warfare that was as mesmerizing as it was effective. They're fighting to music, Kliktor whispered in amazement. Of course they are, Zixthara muttered, because apparently synchronized destruction wasn't strange enough. The hegemony fleet, designed to combat conventional military tactics, found itself completely unprepared for an enemy that treated space combat like some kind of violent performance art. Their carefully planned formation began to fracture as they tried to respond to attacks that came from every direction at once, followed patterns that changed minute by minute, and seemed to be choreographed by someone with a very twisted sense of humor. "War Marshal," Morrison said, his voice now broadcasting on all frequencies so every ship in both fleets could hear. "Last chance to avoid the embarrassment of having your inexorable justice handed to you by a bunch of space hillbillies with anger management issues." "Never!" Thekmon's voice cracked with rage. "The hegemony does not retreat from primitives." "Well," Morrison sighed, "we tried to do this the easy way. Okay, everyone, time to show these folks what humans do when we stop trying to be polite." What followed could only be described as organized chaos on a scale that defied military classification. The human fleet attacked with the coordination of a mob and the effectiveness of a precision instrument. Ships that shouldn't have been able to work together performed maneuvers that should have been impossible, while weapons that had clearly been jerry-rigged from spare parts somehow managed to function with devastating efficiency. The Hold My Beer, the engineering support vessel, apparently decided that the best way to support the fleet was to ram a hegemony destroyer while broadcasting what sounded like a drinking song at maximum volume. Instead of being destroyed by the impact, both ships somehow survived the collision and began spinning through space in a complicated dance that ended with the hegemony vessel's weapons systems overloading in a spectacular light show. The Saturday morning cartoons proved that its captain's ideas about psychological warfare were indeed very specific. The ship began broadcasting what appeared to be human children's entertainment programming directly into the hegemony fleet's communication systems, complete with bright colors, upbeat music, and characters that spoke in voices apparently designed to drive sentient beings insane. "What are they doing to us?" came a panicked transmission from one of the hegemony vessels. I don't know," War Marshal Thekmon replied, sounding increasingly desperate. "The songs, they won't stop. It's working its way into my brain. Make it stop!" Through it all, the absolutely no chill continued its impossible dance through space, somehow managing to be everywhere at once while avoiding every attempt to target it. Morrison kept up a running commentary that was part tactical coordination, part stand-up comedy routine, and part philosophical discussion about the nature of warfare. "See, this is what I was talking about," he said as his ship somehow managed to fly between two hegemony cruisers and convince them to accidentally shoot each other. "You guys are fighting like this is some kind of formal duel. All proper and dignified and boring. But war isn't a duel, it's a brawl. And humans are really, really good at brawls." The Zephyrian fleet, meanwhile, had stopped fighting entirely and was simply watching the spectacle unfold. Zixthara found himself torn between professional admiration and existential horror at what humans considered standard military procedure. "Sir," Vrixneth reported, "the hegemony formation is collapsing. 3 of their heavy cruisers have surrendered, 2 others are requesting asylum, and their flagship is... Sir, I'm not entirely sure what their flagship is doing." On the main screen, the inexorable Justice was spinning slowly through space while broadcasting what appeared to be a children's song about friendship and sharing. Smoke was pouring from several hull breaches, and the crew was apparently attempting to abandon ship while singing along to the music. "War Marshal Thekmon," Morrison's voice cut through the chaos. "Are you ready to discuss terms, or should we continue the educational demonstration?" There was a long pause before Thekmon's voice came back over the comm, sounding defeated. What are your terms?" "Simple. You go home, you leave the Zephyrians alone, and you think really hard about whether starting fights with species you don't understand is a good long-term strategy." Morrison's tone was casual, but there was steel underneath. In exchange, we'll stop being creative with our weapons systems and let you retreat with what's left of your dignity. And if we refuse? Morrison looked thoughtful. Well, we haven't actually tried our new experimental weapons yet. Jenkins has been working on something he calls a reality adjustment beam. And honestly, we're not entirely sure what it does. Could be fun to find out. "Sir!" came a voice from off-screen. "The reality adjuster isn't ready for field testing. Remember what happened to the asteroid?" "What asteroid?" Morrison asked. "Exactly. War Marshal Thekmon apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor. We accept your terms." "Excellent." Morrison's cheerful demeanor returned instantly. "Safe travels, War Marshal. And hey, next time you're thinking about invading somebody, maybe send a fruit basket first and see how that works out." The hegemony fleet began to withdraw, their ships limping away from the battle zone with what remained of their formation integrity. Several vessels were still broadcasting children's music, and at least one appeared to be trailing a banner that read, "I got schooled by humans, and all I got was this lousy banner." As the enemy fleet disappeared into hyperspace, the human ships began their own withdrawal, though theirs was considerably more festive. The Sweet Caroline struck up what sounded like a victory anthem, while other vessels spelled out celebratory messages with their running lights. "Well, Captain Zixthara," Morrison said, turning back to the Zephyrian commander. "I'd say that went pretty well. No major casualties, minimal property damage, and everyone learned something about the importance of not picking fights with heavily armed lunatics." Zixthara found himself at a loss for words. In the space of less than an hour, he had witnessed the complete dismantling of a superior enemy force by tactics that shouldn't have worked, executed by beings who treated warfare like a combination of performance art and recreational activity. "How?" he finally managed to ask. "How is any of this possible?" Morrison shrugged. "Humans are weird, Captain. We do things differently because we think differently. While the rest of the galaxy was developing proper military doctrine and civilized rules of warfare, we were perfecting the art of creative problem-solving. But the tactics, the coordination, the impossible maneuvers... Oh, that's easy to explain. See, humans have this thing where we refuse to accept that something is impossible just because everyone says it is. We figure that if something is supposed to be impossible, that just means nobody's been creative enough to figure out how to do it yet." On the screen, several human ships were performing what appeared to be a synchronized celebration dance while launching fireworks into space. It was simultaneously the most ridiculous and most impressive display of military coordination Zixthara had ever witnessed. "Plus," Morrison continued, "we've got a secret weapon that most species don't really understand." "Which is?" Morrison's grin returned. "We have fun. Most beings treat warfare like it's this grim, serious life-or-death business. And sure, it is that, but it's also the ultimate test of creativity, teamwork, and the ability to think on your feet. We approach combat the same way we approach everything else. With enthusiasm, creativity, and a healthy disrespect for anyone who tells us something can't be done." As if to emphasize his point, one of the human ships, a converted civilian transport called the No Regrets, flew past the Zephyrian formation while its crew waved cheerfully from the observation deck. Someone had painted a cartoon face on the ship's hull, complete with a tongue sticking out in a gesture that the cultural database classified as playfully defiant. "We should probably get going," Morrison said. "Got word that there's another situation brewing in the Vega sector, and the locals specifically requested those crazy humans with the disco ship." "Wait," Zixthara said quickly. "If you don't mind me asking, why did you help us? You had no stake in this conflict." Morrison's expression became more serious. "Captain, humanity spent most of our history watching bullies pick on people who couldn't fight back. We swore that when we got strong enough, we'd make sure that didn't happen anymore. The hegemony was bullying the Zephyrians, so we stepped in. It's what we do. But you could have been killed. Your entire fleet could have been destroyed." "Maybe. But here's the thing about humans, Captain. We'd rather die fighting for what's right than live knowing we could have helped and chose not to." Morrison smiled. "Besides, we're really hard to kill. We're stubborn that way." The human fleet began to form up for departure, their ships arranging themselves in a formation that looked less like a military withdrawal and more like a parade. The absolutely no chill took point, its carnival lights flashing in what might have been a farewell message, or possibly just because they looked pretty. "Captain Zixthara," Morrison said, "it's been a pleasure. If you ever need help again, just send word. The Misfit fleet is always looking for a good cause to support and some interesting people to meet." "Thank you, Commander Morrison. We won't forget this. Just doing our job, Captain. Take care of yourselves out here." The transmission ended, and the human ships began jumping to hyperspace one by one. Each departure was accompanied by a small fireworks display, and several vessels left behind messages painted in space with some kind of luminescent gas. "Thanks for the party," read one. "Remember, disco never dies," proclaimed another. The absolutely no chill was the last to leave, and as it prepared for its jump, Morrison's voice came over the comm one final time. "Oh, and Captain, next time you're in human space, look us up. We'll show you how to really throw a celebration." The ship vanished in a flash of light that somehow managed to be both scientifically accurate and aesthetically pleasing. The Zephyrian fleet was left alone in space, surrounded by the debris of the hegemony retreat and the slowly fading glow of human celebration fireworks. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the soft hum of their ship's engines and the occasional crackle of residual energy from the battle. "Sir," Clicktor said finally, "what do we put in the official report?" Zixthara looked at the tactical display, which was still trying to process the sensor readings from the engagement. Half the data was marked as impossible, and the other half was simply labeled error does not compute. "The truth," he said finally. "We were engaged in a stalemate with superior hegemony forces when a human fleet arrived and resolved the situation through the application of creative tactical solutions. And the part about the disco ball and the children's music? Classified, all of it." Zixthara settled back in his command chair, which suddenly felt very ordinary compared to Morrison's bumper car throne. "Mark it as human military secrets, and file it with the other reports nobody's allowed to read." "Sir, if I may ask, do you think we'll see them again?" Zixthara considered the question. In the brief time he'd interacted with Commander Morrison, he'd gotten the impression that humans were the kind of species that turned up wherever things were interesting, complicated, or potentially explosive. Given the current state of galactic politics, that probably meant they'd be seeing a lot more of humanity in the future. "I think, Communications Officer Clicktor, that we live in very interesting times. And from what I've learned about humans, interesting times are exactly when they're most likely to appear." He looked out at the stars, where the last traces of human fireworks were fading into the cosmic background. Somewhere out there, the absolutely no chill and her sister ships were probably already planning their next intervention. Their next impossible victory. Their next demonstration that the universe was a far stranger place than anyone had previously imagined. "Sir," Vrixneth reported from the tactical station. "We're receiving a transmission from Fleet Command. They want a full debriefing on what happened here." "Of course they do," Zixthara sighed. "Tell them we'll need at least a full day to compile the report, and request that they send their best xenopsychologists. We're going to need expert opinions on human behavioral patterns." "Already done, sir. I took the liberty of flagging this as a Priority Alpha Species Classification Update incident." "Good thinking." Zixthara paused, then added, "Also, contact our intelligence division. Tell them we need everything they have on human military capabilities, tactical preferences, and—" He searched for the right words. "Cultural approaches to conflict resolution." "Cultural approaches, sir?" "Officer Vrixneth, after what we witnessed today, I'm beginning to think that understanding human military capability is less important than understanding human psychology. They didn't defeat the hegemony with superior firepower or better technology. They defeated them by being so completely unpredictable that conventional tactics became useless." As the Zephyrian fleet began forming up for the journey home, Zixthara couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. For centuries, galactic warfare had followed established patterns. Fleets met in space, engaged according to recognized doctrines, and one side eventually gained enough of an advantage to claim victory. It was orderly, predictable, and civilized. Humans had just proven that orderly, predictable, and civilized were not requirements for victory. "One more thing," he told his communications officer. "Send a message to the Galactic Council's Military Affairs Committee. Recommend that they establish a new threat classification category." "What designation, sir?" Zixthara thought about carnival lights and disco balls, about weapons that should have been impossible, and tactics that defied every principle of military science. He thought about Commander Morrison's cheerful grin, and the way he'd turned a potentially devastating conflict into something that resembled a cosmic block party more than a battle. "Chaotic benevolent," he said finally. "Potentially dangerous to established order, but generally aimed at positive outcomes. Recommend extreme caution when attempting to predict or counter their actions. And the threat level? Maximum. Not because they're evil or expansionist, but because they're completely unpredictable. An enemy you can understand is an enemy you can defeat. Humans." He gestured at the space where the impossible battle had just concluded. "Humans might be the galaxy's first truly incomprehensible ally." 3 days later, in a dive bar on the outer edge of human space, Commander Rick Morrison was nursing a beer and trying to explain the recent engagement to a reporter from the Galactic News Network. The reporter, a Diluvian with the kind of professional skepticism that came from years of covering military affairs, was having trouble accepting that the official reports were anything close to accurate. "Commander Morrison," the reporter said, adjusting his recording device. "According to multiple sources, your fleet defeated a superior hegemony force using tactics that military experts are describing as impossible. Would you care to comment?" "Sure," Morrison said, taking a swig of his beer. "What specifically do you want to know?" "Well, for starters, how did you coordinate 300 ships without any apparent command structure?" Morrison looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Who says we didn't have a command structure? We had a great command structure. Everyone knew their job and everyone did it. But there's no record of any formal orders being given, no battle plans filed with military authorities, no hierarchical communication protocols." "Oh, that." Morrison waved dismissively. "Yeah, we're not really big on paperwork. Takes too much time. And by the time you've filled out all the forms, the fight's usually over. So how did your ships know what to do?" "They're humans," Morrison said, as if this explained everything. "We're really good at figuring things out as we go along. Plus, most of the folks who showed up have been in scraps before. You don't need to tell an experienced pilot how to avoid getting shot. They know that part already." The reporter's translator was making frustrated clicking sounds as it tried to process Morrison's casual attitude toward what should have been complex military logistics. "But the maneuvers your ships performed were mathematically impossible. Our analysts ran computer simulations." "Well, there's your problem right there," Morrison interrupted. "You ran simulations. We just did the thing." See, the difference between simulating something and actually doing it is that simulations have to follow rules. Reality is a lot more flexible. Reality is not flexible, Commander. Physics has laws. "Physics has suggestions," Morrison corrected. "Laws are things you can't break. Suggestions are things you can ignore if you're creative enough and have sufficient motivation." The reporter looked like he was developing a headache. "Commander, you cannot simply ignore the laws of physics." "Can't we?" Morrison grinned. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we just did. Our ships pulled maneuvers that your computers say are impossible. And yet here we are, having a beer and discussing it. Either your computers are wrong, or we found a loophole in the universe." "There are no loopholes in the universe!" "Says who? Did you check? Did anyone actually sit down with the universe and ask it to clarify its terms and conditions?" Morrison shook his head. "Look, the way humans see it, the universe is basically a really complicated machine. And like any machine, if you understand how it works, you can find ways to make it do things it wasn't originally designed to do." "That's not how physics works." "Maybe not your physics, but human physics is apparently a little more accommodating." The reporter set down his recording device and rubbed his temples with 2 of his 4 hands. "Commander, I've been covering military affairs for 20 years. I've seen battles fought by every major species in the galaxy. What your fleet did 3 days ago was not warfare, it was madness." "Well, yeah," Morrison agreed cheerfully. "That's kind of the point. Sanity is overrated, especially in combat. When everyone expects you to do the logical thing, doing the illogical thing becomes a tactical advantage. But how do you train for that kind of combat? How do you prepare your crews for situations that defy conventional military doctrine?" Morrison thought about this for a moment. "We don't really. I mean, we do basic training and all that, but mostly we just throw people into interesting situations and see what happens. Humans are naturally creative problem solvers. You don't need to train that into them. You just need to give them permission to be weird." "Permission to be weird? Sure. Most military organizations spend a lot of time trying to make everyone think the same way, act the same way, follow the same procedures. That's great if you want predictable results, but predictable results are predictable targets. We figured out a long time ago that if you want to win fights, you need to be unpredictable." The reporter was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Finally, he asked, "Commander, what's your fleet's ultimate objective? What are you trying to accomplish?" Morrison's expression became more serious. "Same thing every human wants, I guess. We want to live in a galaxy where people can be left alone to live their lives without some jackass with a big ship and a bad attitude trying to tell them what to do. And you're willing to fight for that?" "We're willing to get creative for that. Fighting is just one option, and honestly, it's usually not the most fun option. But if someone insists on being a problem..." Morrison shrugged. "Well, humans are really good at solving problems. We just tend to solve them in ways that make other people nervous." "Like what?" Morrison grinned. "Ever heard of the Terran Independence War?" The reporter nodded. The Terran Independence War was legendary throughout the galaxy. The conflict that had established humanity as a force to be reckoned with when they defeated the Centauri hegemony's attempt at conquest. The Centauri came to Earth with a fleet of 200 ships and demanded our surrender. Morrison continued. Big, impressive vessels, state-of-the-art weapons, crews trained in the finest military academies in the galaxy. They expected us to take one look at their fleet and capitulate immediately. But you didn't. Nope, instead we invited them to a barbecue. The reporter's translator made a noise that sounded like electronic choking. I'm sorry, you what? We sent them an invitation to a barbecue. Big event, lots of food, live music, games for the kids. We told them that if they were going to be in the neighborhood anyway, they might as well come down and meet the neighbors properly. And they accepted? They were confused, but they sent a diplomatic party down to the surface to figure out what we were up to. Meanwhile, we had every civilian ship in the system loading up with party supplies, balloons, streamers, confetti cannons, the works. The reporter was staring at Morrison with the expression of someone who was beginning to suspect he was being told an elaborate joke. Party supplies, party supplies. See, while the Centauri were trying to figure out why we were throwing a barbecue in the middle of a military invasion, our civilian ships were surrounding their fleet. Turns out that cargo haulers make excellent missile platforms if you're not picky about safety regulations. And passenger liners can carry a surprising amount of firepower if you rearrange the interior. You ambush them with civilian vessels? We surprised them with a surprise party, Morrison corrected. The firepower was just party favors. By the time they realized what was happening, they were outnumbered 3-1 by ships they hadn't even considered threats. And then we asked them politely to leave. They declined, so we showed them our party tricks. Turns out that cargo ships full of confetti cannons can do some pretty impressive things to sensor arrays, and it's amazing how disorienting it can be when someone starts broadcasting polka music directly into your bridge communications. The reporter was quiet for a long moment. You defeated a military invasion, with party supplies and polka music. Well, there were some explosions too. Humans like explosions. But yeah, basically. Morrison finished his beer. The thing about humans is that we don't really distinguish between military and civilian resources when someone threatens our home. Everyone pitches in, everyone contributes what they can, and everyone gets creative about how to solve the problem. And this approach works? It worked on the Centauri. It worked on the hegemony 3 days ago. It'll probably work on the next group of jackasses who decide that humans look like easy targets. Morrison stood up and tossed some credits on the bar. The secret is that we don't think like soldiers. We think like people. And people will do absolutely anything to protect what they care about. As Morrison headed for the door, the reporter called after him. Commander, one last question. What's next for the Misfit fleet? Morrison paused and grinned over his shoulder. Well, we heard there's some trouble brewing in the Rigel system. Pirates have been harassing shipping lanes, local authorities are overwhelmed, and the legitimate governments are too busy arguing about jurisdiction to actually do anything about it. So you're going to intervene? We're going to throw another party, Morrison said. Pirates love parties. They just need to be taught some manners about who gets to attend. He walked out of the bar, leaving the reporter staring after him with an expression of mingled admiration and terror. Outside, the Absolutely No Chill was docked at the station's main port, her carnival lights reflecting off the hull of every ship in the vicinity. Her crew was busy loading supplies, some of which looked like legitimate military equipment, others of which appeared to have been purchased from novelty stores and party supply companies. Morrison climbed aboard to find his first officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Williams. Damn, he thought. He'd specifically been asked not to use that name. Lieutenant Commander Rebecca Williams was reviewing their latest intelligence reports, while sitting in what appeared to be an inflatable chair shaped like a giant rubber duck. Status report? Morrison asked. Good news and interesting news, Williams replied. The good news is that we've got confirmation on the Rigel situation. Definitely pirates, definitely causing problems, definitely need to be dealt with. And the interesting news? The interesting news is that they're not ordinary pirates. They're Korthak's syndicate, professional military contractors who went rogue after their government collapsed. These guys actually know what they're doing. Morrison considered this. So they're competent pirates. Very competent pirates. Ex-military, good equipment, proper training, actual tactical discipline. Huh, that's different. Morrison settled into his command chair, which today was decorated with fuzzy dice and air fresheners. Well, I guess we'll just have to be extra creative. Sir, these aren't like the hegemony forces. They won't be confused by unconventional tactics. They've probably seen everything. Rebecca, have they seen human unconventional tactics? Well, no, sir. Then they haven't seen everything. Morrison grinned and activated the ship's intercom. Attention crew of the Absolutely No Chill. This is your captain speaking. We've got a new mission, and it's going to require us to be particularly innovative. I want everyone to start thinking about creative ways to deal with competent, well-trained professional criminals. A voice crackled back over the intercom. Sir, should we break out the experimental equipment? Not yet, Jenkins. Let's start with the standard impossible maneuvers and see how that goes. If we need to get weird, we'll escalate from there. Aye, aye, sir. Williams shook her head. Sir, I'll never understand how you stay so calm about these things. Simple, Morrison said, reaching into a small refrigerator built into his command console and pulling out another beer. I have complete faith in humanity's ability to surprise people. We've been doing it for thousands of years, and we're getting better at it all the time. He activated the ship's main communications array and began broadcasting on the fleet frequency. Attention, Misfit Fleet, this is Commander Morrison. We've got a new situation that requires our particular expertise. Anyone interested in teaching some pirates about proper etiquette? The responses came back immediately. Sweet Caroline here. We're in. Hold my beer reporting ready for duty. Saturday morning cartoons request permission to try our new psychological warfare programming. No regrets is locked and loaded. More ships checked in, each one offering their own unique capabilities. A converted hospital ship wanted to test their aggressive medical intervention protocols. A former sports arena offered to provide motivational entertainment for any prisoners they might take. Within an hour, the Misfit fleet had assembled and was ready to jump to hyperspace. As they prepared for departure, Morrison reflected on how much his life had changed since humanity had joined the galactic community. Before first contact, he'd been a simple cargo pilot, hauling freight between Earth's colonies and trying to stay out of trouble. Now he was commanding a fleet of barely controlled chaos that had somehow become the galaxy's unofficial problem-solving service. It wasn't what he'd planned, but then again, humans were really good at adapting to unexpected circumstances. All ships prepare for jump, he announced. Destination, Rigel system. Mission parameters. Convince some very competent pirates that they've chosen the wrong profession. Rules of engagement. Be creative, be effective, and try not to break any laws of physics that we might need later. Sir, Williams asked, what if the laws of physics don't cooperate? Morrison's grin widened as the stars began to streak past the view screen. Then we'll just have to file a complaint with the management and see if we can work out a better deal. The Absolutely No Chill and her escort fleet disappeared into hyperspace, leaving behind only the fading glow of carnival lights and the distant sound of music that somehow managed to make the vacuum of space seem a little less empty. Somewhere in the Rigel system, a group of very competent, very professional pirates was about to discover that the universe was a much stranger place than they had ever imagined. And in a dive bar on the outer edge of human space, a Diluvian reporter was staring at his notes and wondering how he was going to explain any of this to his editor. The galaxy, as it turned out, was a much more interesting place with humans in it. Epilogue. 3 months later. From the personal journal of Captain Zix Thara, Zephyrian 3rd Battle Fleet. It has been 3 months since the incident with the human fleet, and I find myself thinking about it more often than I probably should. The official reports have been filed, the commendations have been distributed, and our colonies are safe from hegemony aggression. By all accounts, the matter should be closed. But I can't stop thinking about Commander Morrison and his impossible ships. Yesterday I received a message from Fleet Intelligence. The humans have apparently resolved the piracy problem in the Rigel system. The official report states that the Korthax Syndicate has disbanded, and its former members have been rehabilitated and redirected toward more productive endeavors. Attached to the report was a single image, a space station that appears to have been converted into some kind of entertainment complex, complete with what looked like amusement park rides, and a sign reading, Rigel's premier vacation destination, formerly dangerous pirates, now friendly hospitality professionals. I don't know what to make of this. The more I learn about humans, the more I realize that they don't just think differently than the rest of us. They exist in a completely different conceptual framework. Where we see problems to be solved through established procedures, they see opportunities for creative expression. Where we see rules to be followed, they see suggestions to be improved upon. And somehow it works. Fleet Command has asked me to compile a comprehensive analysis of human military capabilities for distribution to all Allied forces. I've been working on it for weeks, and every time I think I understand their methods, I discover something new that completely contradicts my previous conclusions. How do you analyze a species that treats warfare like performance art? How do you predict the actions of beings who seem to make decisions based on what would be the most interesting outcome rather than what would be the most tactically sound? I've come to the conclusion that the answer is, you don't. You simply accept that humans will do whatever they think needs to be done, in whatever way seems most appropriate to them at the time, regardless of whether it makes sense to anyone else. This should be terrifying. A species with advanced technology and no respect for established order should be the galaxy's worst nightmare. Instead, I find it oddly comforting. Because for all their chaos, for all their impossible tactics and ridiculous methods, humans seem to be fundamentally decent beings. They help those who need help. They stand up to bullies. They fight for what they believe in. And they do it all while somehow making the universe a more interesting place to live. I've received word that the Galactic Council is considering offering humanity a seat on the Military Affairs Committee. Given what I've witnessed, I can only imagine how that meeting will go. Actually, on second thought, I'd rather not imagine it. Some things are better experienced firsthand. Note to self, request assignment to the Council's security detail. This is going to be interesting. End journal entry. The end.